the relationship between us and our land. That is a work of thousands of years.
A new page in history is written today.
هنا صوت القدس.
This is Jerusalem calling.
والله يا جماعة الناس مش لاقية تاكل، كيف العاد بدها تدفع ديون والصهاينة قاعدين بأخذوا في أراضينا؟
The British court transferred your land to the settlers.
بلادنا عرفت ناس من ديانات كثيرة.
هذول هم جيران؟ هذول جايين يقعدوا محلنا مش معانا.
ولا راح يعملوا شيء كثير. قلتكم ليش عم نتسلى؟
We are asking for your help in protecting our villages.
I ask you all, have faith that Arab and Jew can live together. With your help, we can create a united and peaceful Holy Land.
We are looking for armed bandits.
We've shut down every Arab printing press. We set up checkposts and curfews. There has to be another way.
There isn't.
أنا بدي شهادة. ما حداش بدي.
عاشت الثورة! عاشت الثورة!
إذا طخوني مين حيجيب محلي؟
أول مرة بحياتي خايفة منك.
نحن عم نحارب عن استقلالنا. دولار هي الأرض.
We're at the crossroads of a major moment in time. Consider which side of history you want to be on.
Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks YouTube channel / podcast where I, your host, film culture critic and film journalist Carolyn Talks, speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I'm very happy to be joined by writer and director Annemarie Jacir to talk about her latest film, Palestine 36, which premiered last year. And I'm finally happy to be able to talk to her because it showed at multiple film festivals, was nominated for many awards and won many awards. And this film is one that I've been waiting for a while to see because it's been distributed by Watermelon Pictures, which is a Palestinian film distribution company, which I've done some work for before. But this film is one that deals particularly with a specific era in Palestine's history. It's set in 1936, and it's set around the Basa massacre, which occurred when several years after the British colonialist empire decided to occupy Palestine for the Jews, making it Israel. There were multiple revolts that were happening, and this film is about a revolt by a particular village, the Basa. And it made me cry, it made me angry, and this is of course because of what is still happening in Palestine, ongoing genocide in Palestine, or I've been calling it a Holocaust because that's what it is. It was happening in Palestine, in Lebanon and Iran, and how that has expanded to all of the West Asia. But this film really does take the story to a very personal level because it's set around this small village, so you get to know the characters, you get to know the people, and you get to know all of them and what their struggles are. But first of all, thank you so much to Annemarie for making this film and to the casting for making this film. And thank you so much to Annemarie for joining me today to talk about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's nice to be with you. Happy to talk. Yeah.
Thank you. So I usually like to ask my filmmakers to just say a bit about themselves. Like, how did you get involved in filmmaking? Because this isn't your first feature film. You have other feature films, and all of them are about Palestinian identity and what life is like under occupation and what life is like living in a region in the Middle East, also known as West Asia, where you have where people are being constantly told by outsiders, by the settlers, by the colonialists to prove their identity, to prove their worth on their own land. But you also have short films. I saw that you've done short films before. So talk a bit about how you got into filmmaking and how you progressed from shorts to features.
Yeah, I've been working for a long time. I started by working in the industry. I was interested in filmmaking, and so I don't come from a background, family of film people, or background of cinema, and I've never really lived in a city that had a big cinema culture, and many reasons for that. As a Palestinian, cinemas were shut down when the West Bank was occupied, And then in Saudi Arabia, where I spent the first 16 years of my life, there were no cinemas also. So I was interested in filmmaking. I come from a family of storytellers and writers. So I think that's something that was already there, and a creative family. But I was very interested in film and the stories of film, and I thought that what I wanted to do was write, actually, screenwriting. And I moved to LA, and I worked in LA for a few years doing many kinds of different jobs, PAing on film sets, assisting with documentary and fiction, doing many, many different things, and eventually ended up in a literary agency where my boss was, of course, representing screenwriters. And so there I was reading about 10 scripts a week. And that's where I realized that I didn't want to actually have anything to do with LA and that kind of cinema. And it just wasn't for me. The city, it wasn't for many reasons. I didn't feel, comfortable there. I didn't feel comfortable as a Palestinian. I didn't feel comfortable as a woman. I didn't, in the industry, like there was a lot of things. And also that kind of storytelling was not, Hollywood makes, some great films, but it wasn't what I wanted to do, and it wasn't the films that stayed with me. So eventually, I ended up applying to film school, and I went to film school in New York. So I packed all my stuff up in a car and drove across the country, and then I studied cinema in New York. And the best thing about New York, of course, was that it's a city that's really an international city, and one that's full of amazing cinema. I mean, all kinds of, everything is, was available, and it was great in that way. And I started to write, and I was also editing. I'd learned how to edit, and I was playing with images before that, and I was doing, sort of experimental things and shooting a lot. I was shooting. It's a classic story, but every family that gets a camcorder, there's some kid in the family who's the one that becomes the cinematographer of the family. Yeah. So I think that was me, and I started working I started making shorts, and I started working with actors, and then I realized what I really wanted to do was to direct. I really loved the process so much of all of all of it, editing and producing, and you do everything when you're in film school, because you have to try everything. And what I really found that I wanted to do was to direct. So I started like that, and I guess my break was I made a short film, which was my thesis film, and that film went to Cannes. And so that's when I got sort of my break, because then I met producers from that short film who were like, you do have a feature. And I'd been thinking about a feature, Salt of the Sea. And that was, I was on my way to making my first feature thanks to that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. I watched a trailer for Salt of the Sea, and Salt of the Sea is interesting because it's about this Palestinian American girl who goes to Palestine, and it's she's from what I got from the trailer, she has this one goal. She wants to get the money that her grandfather still has in the bank there. And she's like, just give me the money. And the people are like, it's just a few pounds, and pounds that doesn't even exist because the currency doesn't exist. And she then it should be easy for you to hand it to me. And they're like, no. And it's basically from, again, me going for the trailer, it's basically about her just I have to go through all of these things, because what you do show is the process of entering Palestine is an extremely long and rigorous process. You have to go through all of these checkpoints, and there's all of these questions and all these interrogations you have to go through. And she's like, I go through all of this to come here. This is my ancestral home, and you can't even give me the money that is also rightfully mine, and the film, and in looking at that and the other films you have Then I Saw You and all of these other films, you're talking basically about how, as a Palestinian, just the right to exist is questioned constantly and consistently, and I wanted to ask you, because what you said about being in LA, like how you didn't feel comfortable there. And this may be a very personal question, but I'm wondering if like one of the reasons you didn't feel comfortable in LA is because people weren't taking your experience as a Palestinian seriously. Like, you know, because in looking at a lot of Hollywood and Hollywood films, Hollywood is also very is very myopic in that it focuses very much on American stories, on American cinema, on American individuality, you know, on American exceptionalism. And there aren't many films that come out that are international stories. You know, if you want an international story, again, you like you said, you went to New York, and that is where like a lot of immigrants from a lot of literally all over the place are settled there. New York is very much like Toronto in that way. But in LA, even if you have people from all over the world there, but their stories still are kind of very centered on American stories. You know,
it's centered on American stories. And I think immigrants that come, like in what I found in California is that it's a city full of immigrants and people, you know, international and people from all over the place, but they're all speaking English. At least when I was there, that was the case. Mm-hmm. Things have, you know, may have changed now, but it was all about how to become, you know, part of white America.
Yeah.
And New York, I didn't feel that. I felt like you could speak your language and you could be who you are and everybody's mixing and moving. And yeah, Toronto, I think, is a lot like that. And a lot of cities are like that, you know, even like, I think Houston, Texas is more like that than, you know, LA, you know, and so it was like, you have to be a certain way. So I found it uncomfortable. I also, because I was very active, I was very outspoken about Palestine. I've never been, you know, quiet about it. And so that was also a source of, you know, tension. It caused me, you know, not to, you know, I was sort of, you know, it was even, you know, even had a boss who told me you shouldn't, you know, talk about being Palestinian. Like, if you want to like get anywhere in the cities, you know, stop talking about it. And that's just not me. I don't, you know, I'd rather not be part of something than, you know, be quiet because I can pass because I look the way I do, or because I speak, you know, English the way I do. He's like, you know, you can just, you know, you don't have to talk about Palestine. But I do have to talk about Palestine because I wouldn't feel like, you know, good, not, I don't know, it's just not for me. So that was, you know, that was something, you know, for me that was one thing. And then I think, yeah, Hollywood is, you know, it's not just American stories that they're only interested in, but Hollywood politically has always had an agenda. And there's always the bad guy. And it's been, you know, through decades and decades, depending on foreign policy, of course, they're always tied together. Oh, there's my cat. My cat. I tell you, my cat's going to make an appearance.
Hi, kitty.
Yeah. So, you know, Hollywood has produced some really anti-Asian cinema, you know, really anti-Black, really anti-Arab, right? Muslim, you know, whatever is the really anti-Russian, like whatever is the public enemy of, you know, the U.S. at that time is what Hollywood produces. And that, you know, and Latin, I mean, you could just go through the, you know, the decades and you can see what's happening. So yeah, I think that's also a big part of it.
Yeah, I call it it's the entertainment apparatus, propaganda apparatus of the U.S. government, right? Like they very much use Hollywood and the films and the TV shows to propagate their foreign policy of the time, you know. And like you said, it is, and it's something that I've pointed out multiple times to people on social media. Is like it is very much like centered on eras and trends. Like there are the chosen enemies of the time, you know, and like in the 50s and in the 60s, it was the Red Scare era. So it was like, it was very much anti-communism, anti-Russia, the Eastern Bloc versus Western Bloc and all of that stuff. And then once 9/11 happened, it was like anti-Arab hate, and that died down. Then it kind of switched to Eastern like propaganda. If people are familiar with like the American history in Eastern Asian and East and Southeast Asia, I'm like, it's right there. Like you're not seeing it, but you're there. But then the other thing that struck me about your films, and I hadn't even really thought about it until we were just talking, is like the other thing that even though you have many of these stories that are written by immigrants and people of color in LA and in California, a lot of the stories are very much centered around assimilation, right? And your stories are not about that. Your stories are, you're trying to keep Palestinian identity and history and culture and struggle at the center of the story, whereas very much a lot of stories by people of color, you know, they talk about representation matters, but the representation matters in so centering white American exceptionalism. I belong here because I'm born in America, yes, but I'm trying to prove to America that I belong here. Whereas your stories and many of the stories that I choose to cover as a film culture critic are very much what people saying, I don't have to prove anything to you. I don't have to prove my right of existence to you.
Yes.
So I'm a human being, and who I am is the story that I need to tell. I don't need to prove to America that I fit in. Even for Canada, like a lot of stories I tell for, or I do work coverage for like Indigenous stories and people of color are about, I don't need to prove to Canada, to the Canadian government, or to the white Canadian identity that I belong here. Like I belong here simply for existing, you know, like this is for Indigenous people, this is my land. I don't need to prove to you that I think. So like a lot of I think that's what attracts me to films like yours and filmmakers like you. You're like, I don't need to prove anything to Hollywood. I don't need to prove anything.
We don't need to do that. And I completely agree with you. And it's like, I don't, you know, some people are like, are you trying to humanize the Palestinians? I'm not at all trying to humanize the Palestinians. I'm not trying to prove you're human. I don't need to prove our humanity to anybody. We are so far beyond that. So far beyond that. I'm not interested in doing that. And I think, you know, it's you know, we're selling ourselves short the minute we start to do that. It's like, come on.
Yeah, and why do you need a film to see someone's humanity? Why do you need to see it? Why do you need to wait until see a fictionalized story or a documentary or a biopic to see people as human and to see them as equal to you? You know, and that's always baffled me. And that's, again, one of the things that I do with my work. I use my work and films as a way to understand people, but I don't need it to help me to see them as human beings. You know, I want to learn about the cultures and histories through film, but I don't need the film to tell me, oh, this person is a human like I am. You know, they have the human. I'm like, so when people say things like that, I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean it humanizes? Like, no.
Exactly.
And they're talking about that, like for this film, like Palestine 36, I'm not seeing it as a film that talks about humanizing Palestinians. I see it as a film that's saying, like, Palestinians have been struggling for over 78 years. And this is one story that has to be told, you know, about the massacre at Basa. You're showing that you're like showing like all of there's been so much rebellions in Palestinian history since Israel, the apartheid state of Israel, was formed. And this film is just about one of those rebellions, you know, and it took place and I love that you chose 1936, not only because this is when the Basa massacre happened, but in thinking about British history, this was the year that King Edward the Eighth, he was Queen Victoria's grandson, was the king, and he was the king that abdicated his throne because he fell in love with a white American woman who'd been married twice. And the reason I bring this up and I want you to talk about this is I've watched many BBC productions, PBS productions about British history and, you know, whether fictionalized or documentaries or biopics. And I've seen a few about about Edward and about this period in British history. And the thing they never talk about is what is happening in the Middle East and in West Asia at that point in time. It's always about humanizing. Now, this is when I talk about humanizing the royals, the colonialists, getting us to feel empathy for these colonizers and these imperialists, you know, and seeing, like, being empathetic to, like, oh, his struggles with love and wanted to be understood by British aristocracy and the politicians. Whereas your film is kind of flipping the script and saying, while he's doing all of this, this is what was happening over here. This is what his policy, his government, and his empire was doing to my people and doing to the entire region. Talk about that, because I love that you put those kind of little bit of vignettes and snippets in, like, the radio broadcast and some of the discussions between some of the characters. And you're like, this is what the British were doing here. Yeah. This is what they were doing in Ireland and in India.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to connect all those places and you know, the colonial government, British colonial, and not just the British, but the French also. I mean, it's, you know, the British and the French had carved up, but definitely, you know, the whole Arab world was chopped up. And I think it's important that those movements, those anti-colonial movements, were also connected to each other. They were informed about each other. They were intrinsically connected, and even influenced. And I think that's important. And also that, you know, Palestine was one of the last colonies. And so all the lessons that they took from India and that they took from Ireland, you know, and they took, like, all of these places, all of the, you know, the British Empire.
Caribbean, where I'm from.
And the Caribbean, exactly. And it's Sudan, you know, everywhere. It's like, this is, you know, they took all these, they were all over the place. And, you know, there was sort of no, you know, there were people, I think, that had a sense like this is not a bad project because we're, of course, educating and we're this and we're that, and it has to be done our way. but it's in I wanted, you see like invocations of that, in the film. And the fact that the characters in the film, the main characters are the Palestinian characters. And I just actually had a conversation just the other day. Somebody said to me, oh, actually he's Palestinian in the US, and he'd seen the film, and he said, I really wish that I'd like you told us more about Thomas, and we followed Thomas's story, and that Tom, like, he was really focused on Thomas, and like Thomas is like an incredible story on its own, but it's like we have to sort of, guys, it's us, it's our story. We don't need to, it's like, maybe because people would probably connect. And I heard this also in when I was editing the film. I shared the film with an editing consultant who said, yeah, I think, for people to be able to connect to the film, maybe you need to like emphasize Thomas's character more, because Thomas is the person that people can connect with. Who are the people that can connect to Thomas? Like white people, like, British people. Like, we need to sort of shift our gaze and talk about things without worrying about if we've, made it palatable enough for the colonialists or the people in power to understand. We need to let go. If they don't get it, it's okay. I know who gets this film. I know every community that's been colonized gets this film. I know everybody who's been controlled or occupied or colonized, they can connect to this film. And so that's it. That is what's important to me.
Yeah. And the thing is like, that's so much, that's kind of why I mentioned that. I love that you add in these snippets about Edward, rather than just like making a big chunk in the film about what was happening in England. Because there's something like, if this was a British production, for instance, there would have been snippets and scenes set in England showing us what was happening in England at that time, and I'm like so glad we did not do that, because it's a very much it's a film method that is used a lot with American films and with British films, like where they're telling stories in other parts of the world, but they have to show us what is happening in these rooms, in these colonialist rooms, in these empire rooms. And I'm like, we don't need to know what is going in rooms, because we're seeing the consequences here. We've seen the consequences of their decisions here. I don't need to see people like Churchill or whoever sitting in a room talking. I'm like, the consequences are being seen here. You have the radio station doing that. And you mentioned like, so there's the character Yusuf, who's kind of like one of the central figures in the film. He's played by Karim, Daoud, Anaya. And he's the person that you're kind of introduced to in the film. And it's like, he gets off the train, and the first thing we see to let us know where we are is Jerusalem, and so he's a young man, and his family is considered a peasant family, like they're farmers, they're agriculturalists, they're like people of Palestinian land, and he's going to Jerusalem, and he's, like almost like, there's this, it's another thing within film where like you have this, the kid from the farm, from the rural area stepping into the big city and being all starry-eyed. And you use that methodology, but you kind of change it in a bit, because the city that he's being so enraptured is not bright lights, it's not billboards, it's Jerusalem. And it's the idea and the iconography that Jerusalem has in Palestinian history at that point in time. Talk about starting the film there, because I love that you kind of, in a way, recontextualize the idea of coming from the farm to the city, but the city is not what we are considered, it's not considered what's considered a city. Because even if it was set in Britain, like that time, it would have been like, oh, going into London and seeing Russian cars and stuff, and you're like, it's not exactly the context of the city has a completely different context in this era in Palestinian history.
I mean, it's Jerusalem, as you said, but also, Yusuf, it's like, it's a lot about, this revolt is a lot about, class as well. And it's, for me, Yusuf, it's more that, he wants to get out of his village. Like, he wants to be part of something else. He doesn't want to be confined to this space. And that's like, the classic story, right? Except for the thing is that, history hits you in the face. The world hits you in the face. Like, we don't have that privilege. We don't have the privilege to not become politically engaged in the world, because we are living it. It affects us directly. So he doesn't have, like, he can't just disappear into the city. If he disappears in the city, he's disappearing as a person. And so, like, I think that's still true today for, a lot of people, when people ask me, why do your films are always political? But everything is political. We live in a political world, and like, I don't have the privilege. I don't live in a place where I'm like, you know what, I don't feel like being political. I don't have that, moment. And I think coming back to Thomas, there is, this moment where, Khulud says, Thomas and Khulud are having a conversation. She says, I'm not a tourist here. She can't just disappear. This is her life. And that's the difference, when someone is, somewhere else, even with good intentions like Thomas, he can always leave, and he does end up. He ends up quitting. He does, yeah.
Without a second thought. Like, he didn't have to agonize over the decision to leave. He didn't have to think about what does leaving here mean for me, and what does it mean. And he's like, no, I'm just gonna leave. Like, fuck it, excuse my language, but that's what he did. He literally was like, fuck it, I'm leaving because I can't do this. He left for a good reason, but the fact that he was able to leave so easily is in and of itself is political, because he didn't, like, not only just political, but it shows like just like cultural as well, that he has no cultural connection to the land. Even though he was living there, he didn't become connected enough to it, and to the people, and to the culture, and to the land itself, where he had to think about what does leaving mean. He had no thing. So like, when people say, oh, you should center Thomas, I'm like, but why? What does Thomas matter to this story? Because Palestine didn't matter to Thomas at the end of the day. He was able to leave. And the funny thing is, people say, oh, focus on Thomas again, because that's centering whiteness and white people's identity, because we've been conditioned to see them that way throughout, like, from film history.
And we become used to looking for that character in film, and like, whether even it's subconscious that you need that character in the film is like, it says a lot about how we're trained to watch films. I have to say something about Thomas, though, just to interrupt you. Thomas, the real life Thomas, did quit, but he didn't quit and disappear. And I have to say this because the real Thomas, who this character is based on, he quit, but he became an anti-colonial activist and a Marxist in the UK. And I think that's also something very important to say. Like, in Palestine, he was living a colonial life. Yeah. So he left, but he didn't like just drop Palestine, but he knew where the problem is. It was coming from the UK. So he was in the UK to battle his own, his own kinds. This is like when people say, like, free Palestine and free Sudan and free all this. Yeah, you know what? Free Europe, because they're the ones who put this on us. You know what? Like, we'll be fine. Just leave us alone. Yeah. Once you leave us alone, we're gonna be okay. So yeah.
and that's the ironic thing is, right? Like, you mentioned, and I'm kind of glad you mentioned it, because I was gonna ask you about it, because like, one of the characters in the film is he is played by Liam Cunningham, who is Irish, I believe. And Liam Cunningham is very vocal on social media. I actually follow his account. And the reason I'm bringing him up, and it's not about centering whiteness, because the people like, but you just talk about decentering whiteness, why are you doing it? But the reason I mention this is that Liam Cunningham is an actor, and he has used his platform as an actor to advocate for Palestinian rights and Palestinian sovereignty, and to speak up against the genocide, and speaking against Israeli colonialism and apartheid. And I wanted to ask you about casting him and actors like Jeremy Irons in this film, because because I think it's important when you have actors who are actually putting actions to words. They're not just saying it, they're actually putting actions to words. And in Hollywood and in Europe, like, there's very few actors who have actually backed up their talk with action, and so I wanted to talk about that. And not only that, but not only just his casting, but also the casting of Yasmine Al-Massri. So she's the character, she plays Khulud, who is the journalist. And it may seem like their characters aren't tight, but they actually think they are, because like Yasmine's character, she's a female she's playing a female journalist who has to use a male name as a pen name, because she's still a woman. And Palestine at that point in time still didn't have female journalists, at least writing underneath their own names, so the ironic thing is, someone would say, oh, why do you have to make this film political? But if you had made this film about Khulud's story, about a female journalist struggling to work in a patriarchal society. No one would have an issue with this film being political
for sure.
in that aspect.
No,
right?
they would not. You're absolutely right, because
I wanted to talk about those two things. We can start with talking about Khulud first, but talk about that, because that's like, people wouldn't have no problem with this film being political if it was about a woman struggling under patriarchy.
I mean, for sure. I mean, if it was about Khulud's story struggling under patriarchy, and every, it's just like become like it's the cliche from like stories from like, the global South. Like, we want, if it's like, a woman who's struggling against her own society, a patriarchal society, and like these Western ways are the thing that's going to save her. Yeah, these stories are so lauded and like so loved. And so, yeah, it's interesting because, Khulud is a bit, I think, she writes under a male name so that she'll be taken seriously. She writes under a male name because she's also writing under colonial government, in which, she's critical of the colonial government. So it's also protection for her. But I totally agree with you. I think that, I think it's the thing about us being victims and like needing to be saved. These are the stories that are sort of, acceptable to make when, you have like, us as, like poor, miserable things that need to be saved. That is, that's the kind of story that's, very much, and we see that, you see that in the film festivals, you see that in, distribution, you see that in the kind of stories. And when you have a film that is not that, and this is a film that, is not that, definitely. And it's like, yeah, we have been wronged historically, but we are active, we are resilient, there is a resistance. These are things that are not okay, not acceptable for, let's say, certain places where cinema, is controlled. So I think, yeah, for sure. And the casting, to come to your question about casting, Liam Cunningham is so active. He talks about Palestine every day. And when I approached him for the film, I mean, I knew, like, he was like, of course I'm in it. And, because like, this is important to me. And it's just, even if it's like a small role, I don't care. It's like, this is like, I want to do this, because I believe in it. Jeremy's participation was, also he's in 3 scenes, and he was like, I'm with you, don't worry. And it was great to have that support. And, Billy Howle, who plays Thomas, he didn't know a lot about Palestine when he started. He read the script. He loved the script. We had a conversation, and it was all about the script and the story. And he wanted to do it. Once he came here and then he saw what was happening, he really, truly understood what is going on in Palestine. And he spent, after the shoot, he spent months in Palestine, actually. He spent a lot of time here, and he got to know it. He was horrified. He's like, I can't, he's like, I can't believe that I never was taught this. I never learned any of this. So now I'm learning, and he's been really active since then. Like, he's now all the time, he's like in demonstrations in London all the time. Like, he's like, I can't like turn a blind eye to this. This is like, this is what I have to do. So it's been, there are people who are like, Liam, and then there's like, Billy, who because of the film his life has changed completely.
And talk about casting some of the other characters. So like we talked a little bit about, to talk about casting like Nassim, and there's Yunma, who plays Marwan, and there's all of these great characters, and Hiam Abbas, who plays Hanan, and I'm going through the thing, looking for her name, the actress, the little girl who plays is
Wardi. The little girl is Wardi. Wardi Eilabouni, and her mother Yafa Bakri. There's Saleh Bakri. There's Dhafar Labidin. There's Rob Arameo plays Wingate. There's like, yeah, it's an amazing Ward, who plays Karim, the little boy, Jalal, who plays the priest. Like, it's an amazing group of actors. And I'm forgetting, I'm not mentioning Hiam Abbas, as you said, and Kamel Basha, who plays the grandfather. Like, I was really lucky because I even have, I these like amazing actors who are playing like, just parts in the film. And it was incredible to have such a team of people. And a lot, and some of them, like, Karim, who plays Yusuf, Yafa, who plays the little girl's mother, Wardi, who plays the little girl, and their first time, on screen. And they're playing against like, actors who've, like Hiam Abbas or Jeremy Irons. It was a really beautiful mix of people from all kinds of different experience in cinema. So yeah, I feel I'm really happy about that. We took a long time in casting. I spent a long time to find everybody that I needed, and I'm lucky I didn't lose them because the process was very hard and they all stayed on board, and that was great.
Yeah, especially because I'm reading up on like the press notes. The film started filming in January of 2023, and like you of course had to halt because the genocide started on October 7th, and you had to wait months to be able to shoot. And like there's some parts I guess that were filmed in Jordan, and keeping your cast together through all of that, I think is just like an incredible feat in of itself, and everybody being able to come back and together. So talk to me about just that, about starting the film in Palestine, in January, and then everything just like literally blowing apart in October.
It literally blew apart. I mean, it's completely, everything was lost. We'd spent so much time, this huge cast and crew, preparing in all kinds of ways, whether it was, the crew on the ground building, restoring the village, planting crops, building vehicles, making, weapons, prop weapons, of course, doing like everything we needed to do. And the cast, everybody was preparing for a long time. There was, cast who like, Yasmine was, typing lessons, like everybody's taking dialect lessons because the accents were really important. It's the way like Palestinians spoke in this particular village in the 30s. We worked a lot on that. Horseback riding lessons, what it was, making, he is going to like learn how to make shoes from like leather shoes. And also I was sending him to church to like, study with a priest, like learn how to, be with the, everybody was doing making bread, cotton picking. Also, they all had to be like, all the village extras had to do cotton picking because we don't have cotton anymore in Palestine. So it's like, so there was like all of this kind of prep. And then, all of that after October, we lost all our locations, and it was, and then the genocide began, and it was, everything was really in a different direction. And it took several months to know if we would be able to shoot the film. Where would we? I knew we were all going to be able to shoot the film, but changes had to be made. And we shot this part of it in Jordan, this big part of it in Jordan. And then we came back to Palestine, and it was, on and off 4 times. It was something else. And all the while the genocide raging around us, it's like the emotional effect that has on us. I mean, I think we never felt more alone in our lives as Palestinians, especially in those early months. It was like, and then the like barrage of like, we're not in Gaza, so we're the lucky ones, but it's like all day long, F-16s are flying overhead. There are drones. There's like, we're having, production meetings, and then, Iranian missiles started. So we were like, running into like shelters. Like, it's like, if there are any shelters, because like 1% of Palestinians like have shelters. It was crazy. It was really crazy. And then it's like, okay, let's go back to the film. Okay, now we have to deal with this. Now we have to deal, with that. It was a labor. I always say that it was really a labor of love in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah, I know we'll begin wrapping this because I know you didn't have much longer, but the last 2 things I wanted to ask you about it, like as I told you at the beginning, like I cried a lot watching this film, especially in the end. And one of the things that made me cry about was like the film is set in 1938, 1936, and then you began filming in 2023, and I just kept thinking like nothing has really changed. And when I say nothing has really changed, I mean not just in Palestine being constantly attacked with these barrage of imperialism, but like white supremacy is still doing so much damage to this world, and I just cried. I was just thinking like we just want to live, like people just want to exist. Like, why does all this war need to be happening? And it sounds, and before, I want to say that, not even the before times, but like in watching these types of films, like for me, as again someone coming from the Caribbean with my history colonialism. Like the British ruled my country for hundreds of years. We only got independence in 1966 and then became a republic only a few years ago.
There's some Caribbean stamps in the film. Do you see that in the stamp scene?
I saw them when he brought the little stamps, and like one of them was for Africa too as well. Because again, because he asked her why are all of these his faces there? She's like, well, he's the king, and I'm like, yeah, a king for all of these nations, and I'm like, yeah. So that's why I like that you kept putting those parts in where you're reminding people. The Brits were instrumental in all this, the Brits and the French, and it's like, yeah, they were doing the colonial thing 100 years, literally almost the entire planet. And that's why I get so pissed when I watch a lot of these films set in England and they're trying to humanize these people and show us these stories. And I'm like, but you're not showing the horror that they're bringing down on other people. You're not showing the oppression that they're causing in other countries, and like, I don't care if he married Wallace or whatever her name was. Tell me what he was doing while he was doing this, and so free but again, as I was crying, but I just also kept thinking, like, what was it like for you guys doing this, having to pause and come back and realize you were making a film about the rebellion in 1936, and then after that there was the Nakba in 1947 and 1948, and since then it's been consistent oppression for the people of Palestine. And I want to ask you, like, how do you take care of yourself mentally throughout this entire process? How do you take care of your own emotional balance, but then also managing that of the cast? Because as the director, you're also responsible for the cast and crew and for their own well-being as well. What was that like for you throughout the entire process? And it's saying, we have to come back and we have to finish the film, and then realizing that many of the places that you would have been filming are gone, and then you're like, then thinking like people that may have been extras in the crew or people that you may have passed in the street are gone because they were killed by the IOF, so, and it's a very heavy question, but I felt like I needed to ask that because I was just thinking, like, what was it like for all of you to have to like persevere and push through that, and just be like, you said it's a labor of love, and it's not only a labor of love, I think, but it's also a labor of perseverance and faith as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, and it was very painful, and for a lot of the cast, a lot of the crew, it's their families that are in Gaza. It's their friends in Gaza. It's our friends. It's it's very close to us. It's I think we always kept saying, like, we've got to do this. We have to do this, and we have to do it for them. We have to do it for the people who can't speak, who have been no longer, like, unalived, like they have been murdered, and they are, we have to do it for them. I think that feeling was definitely very present. I would say for myself, I don't think I have still been able to emotionally, when you work with actors, a lot of really great actors are empaths, and that's why they're great actors. So I was working with a lot of actors, and they were feeling everything, and it was hard for them, really hard. Like even when we were doing scenes in the village, when the British come in, they were feeling it, and they were feeling it deeply. And I'm the director, and I got to keep my shit together, right? So it's like, I feel like in many ways for those, like, I don't know even how long this like film ended up going for, because we had to stop and start so many times. I had to keep going. I knew it was important for all of us. Everybody felt that. We were really close. We were really like family. But I personally, I just have no right. I don't have a right to cry. I don't have the right to do this. I've got to be, strong. I have to keep my shit together, because I'm always I've got to think about my privilege. I live in a place. I have my daughter has a place to sleep. She has a roof over her head. We are making a film. People are like surviving a genocide right now. We're making a film. Like, that's, there's no comparison. And so it was like, I think about all those things. I thought about all those things. I think I kept a lot inside. I think if I started to, really like let myself, because I am an empath too in many ways, I would be like frozen. I wouldn't be able to continue. So I think, I don't know. I don't think I took good care of myself. I don't think I'm still not taking, care of myself health-wise. People are always like, you need to take care of yourself. I'm like, I just can't right now. That's not, I know that this project was important. I had to put all my energy and my focus in this and put it now out there in the world. And now that it's out there, maybe I can like take care of myself. But the fact is, this genocide is still going on. The West Bank is it is so bad right now. Like, let's just talk about today, this meeting you and I are having. People in the West Bank are completely like, they have no fucking food. They're not getting like their salaries. There's like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Israel is withholding their salaries. Teachers are now teaching 2 days a week because they're not getting paid. Like, it's like the situation is beyond bad. And so, yeah, like how, so we can't get out of it yet, but what we have to figure out is like how to move forward. For me personally, how to stay hopeful, how to stay like, I know this is like this dark world that we're living in is not permanent. So I have to believe that, and I do believe that, but just how long can people endure?
Yeah, that's the question I ask every day. Every day I'm just like, it's one new horror after another, like I pay very close attention to what's happening, not only just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. And I'm always like sharing stories, and I tell people, like, I share because like you have to see, like you can't use ignorance as an excuse anymore. You can't.
Yeah.
And like there's the kidnappings happening in the West Bank. There's still the bombings in northern Gaza, and then in southern Gaza, the people that have been able to survive there is like minute by minute, and it's incredibly difficult. And I wanted to ask you, like, because is your art the way you get through this? Because you mentioned at the beginning, like a lot of your experience began in the literary world, right? And in thinking about how your films are kind of structured and how they look and feel and sound, they have a very lyrical sensibility to them, including Palestine 36. Even the way that it moves feels very much lyrical, like not like a song, but a poem, and I realized that there's a poem that's at the end of the film, but I want to make sure I give him his credit. By
Salim al-Nafar. Yeah, it's a poet. He's a Gazan poet.
Yes, he's a Gazan poet. So your films kind of give me this sense that you're very much inspired by poetry, and in what I've been learning about Palestinian culture and history, like poems play a very big part in Palestinian culture and history. And I want to ask you, like, if like this is the way like you kind of like use your art as like the catharsis, like poets use their poetry and their art as a catharsis and to talk about what the things that are troubling them and the things that are stressing them, but also the hopes that they have. And for you, is like is your filmmaking kind of like your form of poetry, because your films kind of give like that almost like this very almost like a dreamlike lyrical sense to them.
Yeah, I think that Salim al-Nafar, who that last poem is, definitely poetry and literature has influenced me and affects me. And I have the utmost respect for writers and poets. That particular poem is from a Gazan poet who was murdered with his whole family in a building in December 2023. They were blown up. But it's a beautiful poem, and so I wanted to pay tribute to him and to Gaza with that poem. But I think I don't know. I think poetry, literature, all of this is a way to resist, it's a way to carry the story, and it's a way not to disappear. And it's, there's something so beautiful about, that people who continue to write, to continue. It's definitely a form of resistance to be, poetic, to talk about literature, to find that it's something that everybody, I think, you work on that and you work hard on that. I was gonna say something else about that, but I lost my trail.
No, because it is like art is resistance, culture is resistance, and one of the ways to do that is to keep making your art, you know, like you had all of these obstacles in making this film, but you made it, you know, and that in and of itself is a form of resistance, you know, and especially because what you were making the film about, you know, the film is about resistance. The film is about Palestinian people saying, even though the odds may be stacked against us, like we still have to persevere, you know, like, and art is the way we do that. It's the way we keep fighting, you know, and art, like filmmaking in itself is like a art form where you have to build worlds from the ground up, you know. You're building a cast, you're building a story, you're building a team.
Yeah. Actually, that's what you reminded me. And that's what I was going to say. Like that is what, you know, creativity is like. You know, you are building something, and you have a kind of freedom in it. So I find freedom in filmmaking. I find freedom in poetry. I find freedom in literature that we may not have in reality. We definitely don't have in reality. But it's what you keep inside, what you manage to keep up here. It's that's, you know, and that's your heart. And so I absolutely think that to be able to create that world is survival, really survival.
It is, and I think that's and I think the way you end the film is beautiful. Like there's two last shots. One is with Afra, and she's just running down these streets, you know, and it's like she's running. I kind of saw it as like she's running to the future of Palestine, and it could be in maybe decades from where her character is set, but this little girl, Wardi, you know, like she's the actress and she's running towards the future of Palestine. And then there's the scene where I don't know what the bagpipes always hit you in the gut in the fields. And I wanted to ask you about that, you know, about those two last shots, you know, what those two last shots mean for you personally, you know, like there's the scene of Afra running down the street, and then there's the lone bagpiper, like, who is basically saying a farewell to, and you know, he's looking out over this cliff, and he's looking out towards the land and everything, to the sea.
Yeah, I will end with that the little girl for me running is you know, really she is what that perseverance is, and with her hair down and her bare feet on these stones, and you know, just the continuation. She's wearing this, you know, catharsis, you know, embroidered dress, same as the one that her grandmother wears, actually. And when her, you know, her grandmother tells her that this moment earlier in the film that, you know, she has something stronger than the entire, you know, British Empire. Mm-hmm. And she says, what is it? And she says, you will know. And for me, she knows at the end, like she just knows in her heart what that is. And that's, you know, the end of that. And the bagpipe, the bagpipe, because it's another thing that, you know, Europeans took, and the bagpipes they took from our region, and then they transformed it into something else, like they did with religion, like what they did with Christianity, and then they brought it back in another form. Now, Christianity they brought back in a violent form, but bagpipes, I love the bagpipes, and I think that you know, whatever happened to the bagpipes, and then they were brought back in a different form, but you know, and now they represent so much, like, about, you know, it's interesting because they have a sort of connotation of, you know, of Scottish and independence, and but it's also like it also represented empire in the Arab world, and like all these marching bands and the bagpipes, but the bagpipes are actually ours originally. So I like just, you know, ending it with this beautiful sound that I love.
Yeah, it's a very haunting song, you know. So it has a very forlorn and very sad song, and like it usually is played at funeral processions and those kind of ceremonies and stuff. So like I did know a little bit about the history, being from West Asia, from the region. So I was just like, I love when you take it, you're like, I'm gonna flip this back around and bring it back to the homeland, you know, and make it as a call for the homeland. But I know you have to go now, but thank you so much, Annemarie, for taking the time, for talking to me, and for this film. And congratulations to you and to the entire cast and crew in getting this film made and distributed. And I'm glad that I finally got to see it, because I protested Tiff and I said no, but I'm so glad. I'm like, no, Tiff, no, disappointed in you. So I'm glad that I got to see it now at the time that I did. But thank you so much.
But Tiff also showed it, and they were brave enough to show it. So that's the other side of the coin. But
the contradictions, the contradictions, like, come on, like,
I know, that's the contradictions. You're right. Thank you. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
hopefully see you another time.
Hopefully, maybe we'll get to see each other at film festival in the future sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you
Take
so much.
care.
Bye. Have a
Bye.
good evening. No, it's night
Thank
there, so have a
you.
good night.
Thank you. Bye.